Welcome back. We're in Genesis chapter 38, verse 11. Let's go. Genesis 38:11. So what's going on here is Judah had 3 children. Tamar married one of them. That husband died. She married another one of his children. That husband died. And now he's like, we're going to save the other child of mine, grown child, until later. Because he's probably afraid that she's going to kill him too, or that he's going to die because he's with her, or whatever's going through his mind. I mean, if you had 2 children die of the same wife, you might be thinking the same thing too. So they had this levirate marriage where if your husband died, you would marry his brother. And so it was the duty of the brother of the person who died to marry that woman, and the first child would be considered the child of the deceased husband. And Judah, the father of the 3 children, the 3 boys, and the father-in-law of Tamar, is in play here. So it says, verse 11, Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, Remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. For he said, Lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went down and dwelt in her father's house. So he's saying, my last child, no, you're not going to marry him now. Even though the levirate marriage law said you're supposed to do that, he was like, not yet. He just kind of delayed it and deferred it. So she takes off for a while. Verse 12, Now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted, and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hirah, the Adulamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. Okay, so what's going on here in these last 3 or so verses? She is saying that the 3rd child of Judah is grown. Maybe she didn't know his age, or she hadn't thought about it in a while or something, or she was assuming that, well, when he's, really older and able, Judah's going to come to me and say, you can now marry my other child. But he didn't. And now she's saying that the 3rd child, the 3rd male, is definitely old enough to have married her right now. So she's mad at Judah because she's like, I want a child, right? It was very important for a woman in that day and age, as it is in many parts of the world still today, to have a child to care for her when she's old. Because if she doesn't have that family, she doesn't have any children, then she's not going to have anyone to care for her when she's old. And unlike America today, where we tend to have these systems in place, Social Security, you have 401k, IRA, 403b, all these savings, stuff that you have that you can live off of, back in that day, very few people had anything like saved up that they would live on. So a lot of the time, they would rely on their children to take care of them, and she was not with child. So it was very important to her to get married, to have a child, and have that child be able to look after her one day. So she's upset with Judah. So she took off her widow's garment. So she would wear a certain type of gear, of outfit, expressing her grief and her mourning. She was still wearing this long after her first husband died, long after her second husband died. And she wraps herself with a veil. Now, this is very important to understand what's going on. So back in that day, the prostitutes would typically dress up in wedding attire with a veil and all. Yes, just like you would imagine a wedding today with a bride in a veil covering her face, so you might not even be able to tell who she was. And this also happened to Jacob when he thought he was marrying Rachel and ended up marrying Leah. There was a veil there and he couldn't see. So she's dressed in this wedding attire. You can imagine why the prostitutes may have dressed in wedding attire. It got guys thinking certain things. And she was waiting for him. And so we'll see what goes on next. Verse 15. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her by the way and said, Please let me come into you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So that phrase right there, please let me come into you, is exactly how it sounds, really. We wouldn't say that in today's day and age. That would sound weird and odd. But that was his way of saying to the prostitute, hey, I want to pay you for your services. he couldn't see her. She was wearing a veil. This is his daughter-in-law he's proposing a deal with, right? Not a marriage proposal, but a relation, whatever. Quick proposal. And so she said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" 17. And he said, "I will send a young goat from the flock." All right. So Judah is traveling around. He obviously didn't go out kind of thinking he was going to find a prostitute, I would think, because then he'd already have the goat ready. But he didn't have the goat ready. And this also plays into everything that God needs it to play into. And so he's going to have relations with this prostitute on credit, right? This is really interesting. This is like, putting something on layaway. No, not layaway, but you're buying it on credit and you got to pay it off. It's like a little credit card, if you will, back then. So 22. So he returned to Judah and, fast forwarded. So she said, what will you give me a pledge till you send it? 18. Then he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" So she said, "Your signet and cord and your staff that is in your hand." Then he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. There's a lot in that verse. So he gives her 3 things: a signet ring, a cord, and a staff. Signet ring was a ring that people would use or wear, and they would stamp the wax on an envelope, and that was in a fixture of like their signature, much like you might have a notary today with a stamp, or you might pick up a pen and sign your name. That is kind of who you are. People would have this unique signet ring, and they would stamp it onto this wax, or press it into the wax, and it would leave its mark. And so that was very personal to him. Like no one else would have a signet ring that looked like that. It says he had a cord. What was probably happening is he had like a chain around his neck, like a necklace, and he held the ring by that. So instead of wearing it on his finger, he wore it around his neck. And he had a staff in his hand. So he had 3 things that he gives her. And then they had relations, and she got pregnant. Oh boy, I'm telling you, the Jerry Springer stuff is all over the Bible. And that is why you can read it and just be like, wow, there is hope for me, right? Because if God loved these people who screwed up so bad, here, this woman's last 2 husbands died, so her father-in-law would not give her the 3rd son. And so now the father-in-law actually has sex with the daughter-in-law. I mean, and she gets pregnant. Right? This is Jerry Springer all over. This would be like top 10 episode of ever. But God works through all of this. God is sovereign. We have free will. Anything we do to screw things up, He knew it beforehand. And the redemption is in the forgiveness. And we want to repent, and He will work through all of that. All things work together for God, all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. Romans 8:28. All right, so let me see where we left off. 19. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. So she took off the prostitute wedding garments. Now she's got back her widow's garments. Verse 20. And Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend the Adullamite to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, "Where's the harlot who was openly by the roadside?" And they said, "There was no harlot in this place." All right. So Judah has relations with this prostitute, who happened to be his daughter-in-law, and he got her pregnant. Of course, he doesn't know it's his daughter-in-law yet, and he doesn't know that she's pregnant. He's just paying off his credit, because remember, he had relations with the prostitute on credit. He didn't have the money. So he put the down payment, if you will, but he's going to get that down payment back when he pays in full with the goat. So he invites one of his friends to go and do this for him. Why can't he just do it himself? He sends someone else to do his dirty work. He's like, you go pay off the prostitute. Probably he felt guilty about it, that he gave into this pleasure. And, right, we live in this flesh, and we are going to give into sin at times. And we just will. We have this flesh. We want to make all these spiritual decisions, but the flesh is going to get the best of us at times. But we don't want to cover it up, and we don't want to cover it up with more lies and getting other people involved. So here he's getting someone else involved to go and do his dirty work to pay off this prostitute. But she's gone. And so he asks the people who are normally around there, he's like, hey, where's that lady who always hangs out here, the prostitute? And they're like, there is no such prostitute. Well, why did they say that? Because there wasn't any such prostitute. She just quickly dressed in these garments, went to where he was going to be. So it's not like she was out there all the time. So they're like, you don't know what you're talking about. There's not a prostitute. So we can't point you to where she lives or where she hangs out or where she might be next. Nothing like that. There's 23. Then Judah said, let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed, for I sent this young goat, and you have not found her. We will pick up, let me see. Yep, we'll pick up there in verse 24 tomorrow. Lord, if we see in the Bible how jacked up a lot of the decisions were, how jacked up a lot of the people were, but yet you loved them anyways. Why that's so important to me is it lets me know that you can love us no matter what we do. But you will only allow us into heaven if we're perfect. And the only way we can be made perfect is if we're made holy. Holy through the blood of your Son, Jesus Christ, clothed in his righteousness for the blood that he shed on the cross. We're going to mess up on earth, but for those who have chosen you as their Lord and Savior, who have accepted the forgiveness that you offer unconditionally because you love us with agape love, then you will let us be in your presence forever in heaven. For anybody who's out there listening and thinks they need to earn it through their deeds, through their works, through saying a certain type of prayer, through going to church a certain number of times a week, through confessing to someone in a robe and a hat on this earth, no, Lord. Help them to know it is just about you, Jesus. It is you. This podcast brought to you in part by the Portfolio Protection Store, where smart investors go to protect their life savings from stock market losses. Visit our website to register for our webinar, theportfolioprotectionstore.com. The webinar is about portfolio protection and safe money ideas for ages 50 plus. Visit theportfolioprotectionstore.com. Located in Austin, Texas, license number 2887886.